welcome to Commander Central, episode 171. And today we'll be taking a look at listener Marty Pavet's Yennett Cryptic Sovereign Stax deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, welcome back after the holidays. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am doing pretty good. It was a pretty uneventful holiday break, but it was nice to have a few days off and see the family, all that kind of stuff. You and your dad got to hang out a little bit?
Yes, we did. We had a good weekend. My brother and his family came up, so it was a good couple days.
Nice. Did you get any fun Christmas presents?
I got a brand new Ducks jersey.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Anything Magic related?
No.
I didn't either. Usually I get something, but like this year I did not get anything.
No, I did not get anything Magic related, which is fine.
Well, we're probably kind of tough to buy things for since we just tend to go get the things we need.
Yeah.
Or the things we need tend to be really obscure as well, and it's kind of tough for the average person to just casually buy us something. So I get that. Yeah, I had a pretty good time too, and back to work today, although it was super dead in the office, so it was work, but it wasn't that much work.
Yeah, same here.
We've got a Stax deck to look at right here for the holidays.
Because everybody wants coal in their stocking?
I guess, yeah. Their hearts grew 3 sizes that day, I guess, after playing against the Grinch's Stax deck. So shall we jump right into it here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. We got a deck here from listener Marty Pavet. I think it's Pavet. I'm gonna say Pavet, and Marty can get mad at me if I'm incorrect here. So the deck that could use the most assistance with is this Yennett Cryptic Sovereign Stax deck. There is a sideboard in the deck list, but it's basically just a short list of cards he's looking at but doesn't have at the moment. Any suggestion would be appreciated, and the biggest question he has for us is, if you encounter this deck in your shop, what would you think of it? So before we get any further in the questions we have here, Max, I will present that question to you and see, and what would you say if you encountered this deck in a shop?
Like if this was like Rule 0 and Marty was kind enough to say, it's a pseudo Stax deck, just to give everybody kind of a heads up of what we're coming into, I have no problem at all. I'm probably not going to play my weakest deck, but I'm probably also not playing my strongest deck. I just want to make sure I have a deck properly aligned with it, so I kind of stand a chance and know we don't have a miserable game.
That's exactly my thoughts as well. This is where Rule 0 really does come in. I want to make sure I'm playing a deck commensurate with the power level, and I would want to know it's a Stax deck because I might just not be in the mood. Like maybe I had a bad day at work, or, I'm coming off a cold, or my blood sugar's low and I'm going to, feeling prickly or something too. Or I just wouldn't want to deal with it. Like sometimes you're just not in the mood to fight through a Stax deck. So having that heads up is what would matter. But sometimes I am in the mood for that puzzle. Like sometimes you do want to fight through that and have to try to deal with the intricacies of being denied resources and having to figure out how to get around all the things in stacks that lock you down. So I think as long as I know what's coming, I don't have a problem with it either.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the challenge is fun when you're in the mood for it.
Absolutely. So the next question we have here is, what is your meta like? And Marty says his meta tends to be pretty cutthroat. The decks he plays against most often include Brea, Urza, Aloro, Timna Tana Bloodpod Partners deck, and Yawgmoth, all of which are tuned about as high as they can go.
He said occasionally, though, people do bring in some pretty fair decks, and for this reason, it's nice to have a deck that can play in both environments. We ask, of course, what is the goal of the deck? And he says the goal is to slow down or stop the combo players and grind out value until I can win off creature beats, or preferably a massive Torment of Hailfire.
All right.
What about the deck's weaknesses, Dana?
Well, the deck's weaknesses here are it can generate a lot of aggro early from other players, and it can struggle to handle that. This is especially true if they've played against it before and he's been forced to drop like a Winter Orb or a Torpor Orb, so people can see that coming and maybe don't want to deal with it. Additionally, there are games where the deck just sort of sits there doing nothing. It can be hard to advance the game once everything is stalled out if he doesn't find any big spells or a tutor. He also struggles a little bit with recursion. Something outside Sun Titan would be nice. That said, he's worried that putting a recursion package in the deck might water it down too much. He's thought about Time Twister for this purpose, but in reality, he'd have to proxy it, and that doesn't seem like something he wants to do.
That's always good to hear when I hear people say that.
Yeah.
Budgetarily wise, there are a few high-end cards in the deck already. Obviously, if the money needs to be sent, he'll save up for it, but the update should be about at the $20 mark. And he just says thanks again for looking at the deck, and he hopes all the other listeners enjoy this episode.
All right. Let's dig into this here a little bit. So, first things first, we'll read Yennett. Cryptic Sovereign was a commander in Commander 20... that was 2018?
It was 2018.
Man, time flies when you're playing Magic.
Right?
So Yennett is 5 CMC, 2 and Esper for legendary creature Sphinx. Yennett has a Flying, Vigilance, and Menace, and whenever Yennett Cryptic Sovereign attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If that card's CMC is odd, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. Otherwise, you draw a card. The average CMC of this deck is quite low. It's around 2.2, and that's even with running some beaters in here that are being cast for free because of Yennett's ability. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty tight deck all told. Should we look at the land base first?
Yeah, let's start with lands.
All right.
There are 35 lands total. There's a Cabal Coffers, Command Tower, all 3 fetches, all 3 shocks, all 3 check lands. There's the Battle Bond, Morphic Pool. We have the Silent Clearing, the Horizon Land, and of course there are 17 basic lands.
Yeah.
18 basic lands, and they're all snow-covered.
So what do you think of the land base?
I think it's safe.
Yes. I would guess, based on the amount of basics and the description of the meta a little bit, we probably got some Blood Moon / back to basics kind of effects out there pretty regularly, I would guess.
Yeah.
So that completely makes sense. I mean, that's a really good land base. I don't know if I would change very much at all. You could maybe, run a City of Brass or a Mana Confluence in place of a couple of those lands. Like the I don't know what though. I was going to say the Horizon lands, but those are nice because they get sacrificed, and there aren't any normal pain lands in here. Maybe you could swap them out for like the Isolated Chapel type of buddy lands. Mm-hmm. That way they just make you all 3 colors, but this deck isn't running a ton of things that are like double or triple pipped, so it's probably mostly hitting its colors relatively easily.
Yeah, for sure. I think you took my definition of safe in the way of the meta. I meant it as it just seems really safe. Like it's not too extravagant. You know, it's not. You're running the 3 on color fetches. Maybe consider running Fabled Passage or Prismatic Vista just to make sure you're on your colors right away. You brought up City of Brass and Mana Confluence, although that's not $20 anymore.
Right, yeah.
Because it is a combo meta, maybe a couple land removal lands just might be worth it.
Yeah, that's never a bad idea. It's a little bit trickier in a 3-color deck, but...
I mean, even like a Field of Ruin, so you replace it.
Right, yeah. And of course, we always are, big fans of Scavenger Grounds, and there isn't one in here either. But maybe it's an environment where you just can't, you don't see enough graveyard stuff that it matters. But I don't know. I never ever feel bad seeing Scavenger Grounds.
Yeah. This deck has a lot of instants or sorceries, so like Mystic Sanctuary might just be easy to swap out for one of those snow-covered islands. Especially
when there are that many basic islands in here, in addition to the actual couple of shock lands that have the island type. Mm-hmm. And then that's not a bad idea.
And then just another way to maybe build up a board state would be put a Field of the Dead in here because you are running a bunch of different named lands.
Sure.
Making a 2/2 zombie for just playing Magic seems pretty good.
Yeah, especially in a Stax type deck where you're going to be forcing people to do things. It's good to have extra bodies lying around that you can sacrifice to effects. So there isn't a ton of sacrifice stuff in here necessarily, but I mean, if it doesn't cost you anything, just making bodies is always pretty useful.
Yeah.
The one other land I would probably mention in here, and that's just mostly because there's a expedition map under the tutors, and because expedition map only gets you a land, and the only land in here that seems like it's one that you would probably specifically tutor for is Cabal Coffers, or maybe Urborg if you have coffers. If you are going to run an expedition map and you're in blue, I feel like I probably also want Teleria West. The only downside is it comes into play tapped if you use it as a land, and the upside is you can use it to go as a tutor to go get your Cabal Coffers or your Urborg. So I just feel like if you want Cabal Coffers or Urborg badly enough to run expedition map, and I don't see what else you'd be using to get those with X map aside from those two, then I feel like you probably also want Teleria West. So, how about ramp, which is all in the form of mana rocks basically here. We've got 10 different pieces of ramp. Dimir Signet, Felwar Stone, Grim Monolith, Lotus Petal for the fast start, Mana Vault, Mind Stone, Mox Opal, Soul Ring, Talisman of Dominance, and Talisman of Hierarchy. That's a really solid suite of mana rocks.
Very solid suite. I'll make note that there is an Arcane Signet in that sideboard of cards he's looking at.
Yes.
I think that's just a strict upgrade over the Felwar Stone.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, the third talisman, and I neglected to write down which one it is, Talisman of, I've forgotten. The third talisman would be probably one I would also consider over Felwar Stone. I mean, I guess it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I would absolutely do Arcane Signet over it.
Yeah.
Having the option there is one I would for sure run. The rest of the rocks here are either Stax pieces, or excuse me, the rest of the artifacts here are either Stax pieces or things that interact with Yennett. So you have Cursed Totem as a Stax piece, Grafdigger's Cage to shut down people's graveyards. There's a Scroll Rack and Divining Top to manipulate the top card of your library for Yennett's ability, Torpor Orb and Winter Orb as Stax pieces as well. So 17 total artifacts, and that's enough to keep that Mox Opal online that we mentioned under rocks also.
Yeah. What do you think about Grafdigger's Cage as a Stax piece in this deck?
Don't love it. For one, it doesn't do anything with cards in the graveyard, so it only solves a problem as long as it's in play, and the second somebody removes it, all the stuff in their graveyard is once again on the menu. And there are things that get around it too. Creature cards in graveyards and libraries can enter the battlefield, but it doesn't mean you can't get things back from your graveyard with like a Regrowth or Yawgmoth's Will or whatever. You can still, the way it's worded, you can still get around Grafdigger's Cage. It's not a choice I would use particularly.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I really don't like it because of the second clause on the card. Players can't cast spells from their library or graveyard.
What about that is the problem here, do you think?
It nombos with Yennett because you cast that card.
Oh, from
the attack trigger.
From libraries. Players can't cast spells from libraries. I missed that entirely. Yeah, no, that's not good. Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a couple other suggestions for Stax pieces instead of it.
Okay.
Seeing that all of his creatures have less than 3 power unless Elish Norn is out, I would consider Meekstone because that makes all creatures with power 3 or greater not untap.
And Yennett gets around that by virtue of having Vigilance.
Yes. The other one would be Trinisphere, just to stop those early game plays from your opponents.
Yeah.
And my final one is a Smokestack itself. But doesn't have a lot of sack fodder in this deck. Yeah. So I don't know where you really want to set those smokestack counters at.
That's true. And you run the risk of like encountering that token deck and then it burns you way more than it burns the token deck. Yeah, I do think if you want, I think those all mostly make sense, Trinisphere especially. I think if you really wanted the graveyard hate, and you wanted it on an artifact, I would just run Relic of Pretendedus probably there.
Or Tormod's Crypt or something.
Yeah, something that you can like just solve a problem every time consistently and have it go away versus Grafdigger's Cage where it might solve the problem and it might solve the problem as long as it remains on the battlefield. Like Relic just gets it done, so does Torment Script, or Nihilil Spellbomb even in this deck, where you can then, and it replaces itself as well. So yeah, I would run all of those 3 before I run Grafdigger's Cage, I think. Maybe there's some synergy with it, weird we're missing, but particularly now that you've pointed out the players can't cast spells from libraries, and that's how Yennett's worded, I wonder if that has gotten missed here, because I didn't catch it for sure. And it's an easy thing to miss.
It is.
I always think of Grafdigger's Cage in terms of graveyard, not library. That's interesting. Nice catch.
How do you feel like about that? There's no like lightning greaves are Swiftfoot boots. There we go. I got it right.
I was the greaves especially. I was surprised. Swiftfoot boots. I mean, I guess you have to equip them, and that's not. I mean, it's only one, but it's not perfect. Greaves are so like low effort. You just have them out there and equip them for nothing, and there's so little downside. Greaves, I was a little bit surprised about. But maybe it's a meta where you don't ever run into targeted removal. I don't know. Could be.
My opinion, there's a lot of counter magic in this deck, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But I feel like if you're holding up counter magic just to protect Yennett from being swords or path, why not just cut a counter magic card for Lightning Greaves?
Well, and you also then have the problem where if you're relying on your counter magic to save your commander, you have to cast your commander at a point when you have mana available. Whereas Lightning Greaves are something that you can cast your commander with no mana free and then equip Greaves. I mean, you're still vulnerable to, I guess, instant speed removal, but the problem of relying exclusively on counter magic to save your commander is you have to always have that mana free. So yeah, I'd be really tempted at least to find a slot for Greaves, but if you told me there was a meta reason you're not running them, I guess I would believe it. And sometimes the problem with Greaves is because you can't target your own creature, some decks have an issue where they want to target their own creature. I don't think there's anything that I saw in here where you're targeting a net with it.
No, there is not.
So that's one I would definitely consider too. And I mean, Lightning Greaves is always, $5 till the end of time, but but it does work. There's a reason it's $5 too. All right. Should we do Planeswalkers next for something different? Let's hop over there.
Sure.
We've got Amanatu the Fate Shifter and Ashiok Dreamrender, Jace Wielder of Mysteries, Narset Parter of Veils, and Teferi Time Raveler. So Amanatu has a little bit of synergy here with Yennett because of that +1 where you draw a card and then put a card from your hand on top of your library. So that really makes sense. Ashiok is a really great piece of graveyard hate and kind of stacks in general. Same thing is absolutely true of Narset. Same thing is absolutely true of Teferi Time Raveler. The only one I was mostly not super into was Jace Wielder of Mysteries. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Jace seems out of place here. There was a portion of the notes that we didn't cover that he did say he has won once with Jace, but it was a painstakingly grindy game, and it didn't sound fun. I understand why Amanatu is here, to set up your Yennett, your trigger, but I think I'd rather just have something like, another scry ability or something to make sure I always have something ready.
So the +1 on Yennett is pretty useful, on Amanatu, but you're probably not using those other abilities very often. And it's, someone just has to swing into Amanatu and that advantage is gone. Comparably, something like Soothsaying, which is an enchantment, and it's 1 to cast, X, look at the top X cards of your library and put them back in any order. It also has 3 blue to shuffle your library, but being able to rearrange those top cards on an enchantment that costs 1 mana and is much harder to remove than a Planeswalker, I feel like it's going to do the same thing Amanatu does most of the time, and probably stick around for a lot longer, I would guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. But the rest of them look great. It's exactly what I would run, if you want to walk down the game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like seeing an Ashiok. I don't like seeing Teferi. I don't like seeing Narset. But in this deck, they make absolute sense. I don't want to play against them, preferably, but they're absolutely really, really solid pieces here. So in Jace, again, if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. His +1 target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, and then you draw a card. And the -8 is draw 7 cards. Then if your library has no cards in it, you win the game. I mean, I don't doubt he won the game with it at one point in time, but like I feel like there's a whole lot of Planeswalkers that you could have substituted into that hole, and they also might have won you the game one time over a long slog. I just don't think Jace does enough there. So that would be one I would definitely look at. But I agree with your Amanatu thing. That's an easier replace with something like Soothsaying that does the same thing and is probably more effective. Mm-hmm. So let's do sorceries next, because there's only 7 of them, and they're heavy on the really strong cards. There's Demonic Tutor, Night's Whisper for draw, Ponder and Preordain to let you mess with the top of your library a little bit, and they're really efficient. Read the Bones, another efficient card, Torment to Hailfire, and a Toxic Deluge to wipe the board.
All good stuff.
Those are all great cards. I would have a tough time arguing against any of those 7 cards in almost any deck. Torment's just a win condition. It's one more thing that synergizes with Cabal Coffers, but like it's never bad. A turn 5 Torment of Hailfire is still usually pretty effective, let alone if you happen to drop it on turn like 8 or 9 with counter magic available and you've made a bunch of mana off your rocks or something. So I get it. I don't know what I would suggest here other than maybe he mentioned that he sometimes struggles as the game goes on and he hits a stalemate, and I feel like part of that problem is maybe lack of card advantage. Ponder's a really good card, Preordain's a really good card, but they don't necessarily put you ahead cards in hand, and there is some draw in the enchantments over here. When we get over to that part, we'll go over there next, but I would maybe be tempted to run just one more bulk draw spell in there, whether it's Notion Rain or something like Chart a Course, because I'm going to guess you're going to be attacking with Yennett fairly frequently, or even just, an Ambition's Cost or a Sign of Blood even, like just something that puts you cards ahead. I feel like I would want to see maybe just one more of those in this deck. Any thoughts there?
No, yeah, I think that's fine. I went more the board wipe route, going with something like Ingaruk's Wake or Plague Wind, because it's all one-sided. And you get to cast them off your net for nothing. Right. The issue being, if they're in your hand, though, you're kind of SOL. Right. So how about the enchantments? We'll pop over there, because I was just talking about some draw spells. There's 5 of them. There's a Land Tax. There's a Leyline of the Void, Mystic Remora, Necropotence, Necropotence. If you want me to say it correctly, force a habit there, and Ristic Study. So those are all 5 excellent enchantments, and I don't know if any of those I would pull out, except for, what are your thoughts on Land Tax there? I don't like it in this deck. I think when you want it on turn 1, it's going to be rare when that happens. And late game, this is not something I want to see off of Yennett. Yeah. It does have that scroll rack synergy, which is nice as a draw engine. Go grab 3 lands and then put them back on top with when you to grab 3 new cards of scroll rack, knowing that you're going to shuffle them away again next turn with Land Tax. But I don't know if you get both of those out, that's great, and scroll rack is obviously great on its own. Land Tax is useful, but I feel like this deck that has access to draw, I don't know if you need to go get lands other than, I guess it gives you a shuffle if you know what's on top for Yennett maybe. I think, again, I would, if I wasn't going to replace Amanatu with Soothsaying, I'd be tempted to run Soothsaying here instead of Land Tax. If you're using it sometimes just because you want to have the option to shuffle things away, I'd be pretty tempted to do that with Soothsaying instead. So the other ones are all great. You have 3 ways to put cards in hand, which I think this deck does need. Leyline of the Void is great for shutting down graveyard decks as well. Is there anything you would add here? Yeah, I have a couple things. I think over Land Tax, I would rather just run Smothering Tithe. I thought about that too. I mean, the only downside is it's 4 mana, right? It's 4. You're not going to cast it for free, but it's such a value engine. Like, I feel like it's just going to...
And do you care if you cast land tax for free at 1, 2? I mean, yeah, you cast
No.
it for free, but like that's not really a win.
No. So I would rather cast Smothering Tithe from my hand and just have it either eat a removal spell or
Right.
generate me a ton of mana so I can recast my commander for the 10th time or whatever.
Well, and that's a good point about eating removal. So particularly in this deck, when you play that land tax, unless you maybe happen to have Scroll Rack out and you're doing the draw 3 off at every turn, no one's going to care about your land tax for the most part. If you have a Smothering Tithe out, you have to deal with it. The amount of mana you're going to generate is disgusting. And the fact that people will have to remove it is kind of important. You're killing a removal spell probably after you've already gotten a few treasure tokens off it. Yeah, I'm really tempted to run that there in that slot as well. So that's a good call.
Thank you. My other one is Act of Authority. Wait, that might be wrong.
Is that the enchantment that comes into play?
Yep, that's the wrong one. I'm
Okay.
thinking of something else. Enchantments and artifacts cost 2 more.
Aura of Silence.
There we go.
Yeah, Aura of Silence is a really solid card in almost any situation. It's 3 mana, so it would be one that you could conceivably cast for free off Yennett. It does fit the theme of staxing people, and in this case, I guess, taxing people out. And when you need to use it as a removal spell, you can just remove something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, you run that in at least one deck, right?
I run it in Brago, and I think I run it in Tuvasa.
And it's never not a pain to play against.
No.
And not only does it screw you up when you're like, okay, I have to pay this and now this much mana, and I was going to cast 2 spells next turn, and now I can only cast 1, and one of those is a mana rock, and like, because I can't cast it this turn, I'm going to be that much. Like, it sometimes puts you not just 2 mana behind, but because it slows you up, it puts you then 4 mana behind because you couldn't cast that mana rock, and then that means the next turn you're 6. Like, it's cumulative in how much damage it does to your opponents. It's really effective. And the additional problem when you're playing against it is you're like, okay, well, now this True Conviction costs me, or this Rhystic Study or whatever costs me, an additional 2. It costs now 5 for Rhystic Study, and it now costs 8 for True Conviction. But I also can't cast them, or they're just going to blow it up with the Aura of Silence. So then you have to think to yourself, okay, I need to either remove the Aura of Silence, in which case the person just sacrifices it and blows up something anyway, or I have to just not play my thing and wait it out until somebody else does it. It completely messes up whatever your plans are. So no, that's actually a great card, and I would probably love to see it in this deck. Good call, Max.
Oh, hey, look at that. I'm up to 2 tonight, everybody.
You're a genius. It's the Christmas. Santa brought you great ideas.
In the form of beer, so yes.
and we're not recording during the day, so you can actually drink your beer this time.
Oh, yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
It didn't make it till Planeswalkers.
All right, let's hop over and look at the 11 creatures in this deck. There's an Aven Mind Sensor, there's Elish Norn Grand Cenobite, a Gilded Drake, a Hushbringer, Kambal Council of Allocation, a Notion Thief, Snapcaster Mage, Sun Titan, Thalia Garden of Thraben, Thief of Sanity, and Timna the Weaver. Those are all cards that generate value and or do stacks things in this deck. I don't know what I really take out or add here necessarily. Do you have any thoughts?
I do in the sense of stacks, because I guess I'm into this now. You're running one Thalia, run the other one.
Sure, yeah.
Non-basic lands and creatures coming to play tapped.
Really irritating.
The other one is Spirit of the Labyrinth. There's not a lot of draw in this deck,
Yeah.
so you might as well make everybody only draw 1 card a turn.
And a couple of the things that you do have in here for draw are things like Necro that just puts a card in your hand so it works around it, or things like Mystic Remora or Rhystic Study that allow you to draw on other players' turns, so it also isn't really necessarily hitting you as badly as it would be someone who's trying to draw 4 cards in a single turn.
Yeah. And then my final one would be Linvala, Keeper of Silence, just to shut down maybe some of those mana dorks your opponents are playing.
Yeah.
just another layer of oppression.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. The rest of these pieces are all really good. I mean, Snapcaster's great recursion. Sun Titan. Sun Titan was the one I was not 100% sure on. Not that Sun Titan isn't a good card, but I don't know if there's that many things in this deck, because it's only permanent.
Right, but it's getting you almost every Stax piece back.
That's true. So
it
you're
gets
assuming
all 3 Planeswalkers that you want back. It gets you your Torpor Orb. It gets you your Winter Orb. It just gets your Stax pieces back.
I guess I was kind of thinking, I tend to usually think in terms of you putting things in your own graveyard, and there's not a lot of stuff here that you're putting back in your yard, but I guess if you're looking at it that way, people are probably going to want to be removing your Winter Orb and your Torpor Orb kind of effects, and they want your Narset gone. So they're going to be removing them for you, and this is going to give you a chance to bring them back into play. So that's fair. I get that.
It also gets all but 2 of the other creatures in the deck back. I mean, it gets back a lot of stuff that's very valuable to this deck, in my opinion.
You sold me on Sun Titan, Max.
Love it.
Not
3 for 3.
Don't get me wrong. Again, Sun Titan is a great card, but I was thinking in terms of self-sacrifice or destroying your own stuff, and this does hit a lot of targets here, even if you're not putting them in your graveyard yourself. So
it's similar to the same reason I run it in Brago. I'm not putting stuff there, but true. I just want it all back.
Good point. And really, it's the same thing in Brago. A lot of your stuff there is so effective and does impact the board so much that other players are trying to remove it, and this lets you recycle it after they've all done the work to get it out of the way. You just bring it back. So, good point. Any more creature stuff here?
That's all I have.
Okay. Instants.
There's a lot of them.
19, which makes sense in a control-ish kind of deck.
Yep.
So, Anguish Unmaking, great piece of removal. Brainstorm lets you mess with the top card of your library at instant speed, which is useful in Yennett. OG Counterspell, just to stop people from doing stuff. Cyclonic Rift, which ruins everyone's day. Dovin's Veto, another new counterspell for 2 mana that can't be countered, and it targets a non-creature spell, which is probably what you're mostly worried about in this deck. Flusterstorm is a really solid counterspell in an environment where people are casting a lot of things on the stack. You have a couple of free ones, Force of Negation, Force of Will, that can be cast for 0 mana if you need to do that. Generous Gift for removal. Mystical Tutor as a way to find a piece. Narset's Reversal as a counterspell. Or technically you can use it to basically copy your spell and return it to your hand so you can recast it if you need to. Opt, some more filtering. Pact of Negation, another free counter. Path to Exile, a great way to remove a thing. Pongify, Swan Song, Source Plowshares, Vamp Tutor, and Void Shatter as a counterspell. So that's a pretty solid selection of instants there, but I do have a few things.
Okay.
First of all, Void Shatter.
It's cancel.
It is a better cancel because it has Devoid. And if the spell countered this way would be countered, it's exile instead of put into its owner's graveyard. So it's 3 mana to exile the spell that you're countering, and it does have Devoid. I'm wondering if maybe Marty sees a lot of Red Elemental Blast, Pyroblast kind of counters in the meta, and that might be the case given everyone's running really tuned decks. So maybe Void Shatter is a way to counter stuff that can't be Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blasted, maybe?
I want to think that is the reason. My guess is it's, he has, 4 of the best 5 counter spells in this deck. And to keep the curve low, maybe it's just the best version of cancel. And it kind of lends itself to the friendliness, playing with more lesser power decks, so he doesn't have to be like, oh, look at my Pact of Negation into my Force of Negation. You can just be like, Void Shatter, and it doesn't make...
maybe.
Maybe it's that type of card.
Because obviously I think if you were going the best deck this could be, that would be a Mana Drain.
Yeah.
That's also $150 or something absurd right now.
Right.
Yeah, if the reasoning isn't the Pyroblast or Elemental Blast workaround, I feel like I would probably just want to run some Negate there.
Yeah.
Because it is 3 mana, and, I guess it's a 1 mana difference, but the fact that one of those mana is blue, allowing you to negate lets you just leave up a colorless and blue versus 2 blue, winds up being a really big difference a lot of times. But negate dies to Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blast, so maybe, like I said, maybe that's what that thinking there is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of filtering stuff here, like Opt, and those are good cards in general. They're kind of even better in this type of deck where you get to cast things off the top, so it gives you manipulation. That all makes sense. Mystical Tutor and Vamp Tutor are never not fantastic cards, but again, here, they let you put something on the top of your library where you can cast it for free with Yennett, so they're that much better. I have a tough time really offering up a ton of suggestions here for things that are better. Maybe Generous Gift. I would run something like Utter End, maybe, but it is 1 more mana, and it is 2 colors to cast it versus just 1 for Generous Gift. So I guess it becomes a question whether or not the exile is worth it for you or not. Not that Generous Gift isn't really good, but I'm torn there. I can see an argument for both. Anything jump out at you here?
Yeah, so I have a couple of suggestions here. I'm not a big fan of Brainstorm in EDH, but I get why it works in this deck, and I get why people like it.
Yeah.
If I were
in this deck especially, it's the one, like, I totally agree with you. Brainstorm, I think, is pretty overplayed, generally speaking. Yennett is one of the few commanders that does kind of work around that because you're presumably using it pretty often for that cast a card off the top effect.
Yep. So if I were to replace Brainstorm, I would do Limdual's Vault.
Yeah.
It's an instant. It lets you dig down 5. If you like them, you can reorder them any way you want and put them on top of your library, or else you can repeat the process for the cost of a life point as many times as you want.
That's a really good call. I mean, it's a great card in general.
Oh, yeah.
And I might be tempted to do that instead of even like a Preordain or something. It's 1 more mana, but the fact that it's instant speed and it's anything, you are going to lose a few life, but the fact that you can dig down and basically treat it like another Vamp Tutor almost.
Yeah.
So no, that's a nice call there.
I agree. I'm not a big fan of the Void Shatter. If you wanted to keep that 3 mana counter spell in there, I kind of like Sinister Sabotage over it because it can counter anything, and you get the Surveil trigger off of it. So you can look at that top card. If you don't like it, you can put it into your graveyard.
Yeah, or even like Dissolve that gives you the Scry, I feel like is probably more useful, particularly again in this deck where you care about the top of your library.
Yep. So I have 2 more. The first one is a card that's in his sideboard, which is Nexus of Fate. Seeing that he has won a game through Jace, putting Nexus in instead of Jace will mean you will never have to worry about milling yourself out.
Right.
And then, extra turns, they suck, but I think this is the deck where if you take 1 extra turn or 2 extra turns, you're going to win in those 2 turns.
Yeah, probably. And, not to be discounted in a deck that cares about the top of your library, the fact that Nexus shuffles back in, giving you a free shuffle if you don't like what's on top, isn't nothing. Like, that is fairly useful sometimes.
Yep. My final one, and I'm only mentioning this because Time Twister got brought up, and I've never seen this card played in EDH, is Emergency Powers. It's 7 mana from Ravnica Allegiance.
Yep.
Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their libraries and draws 7 cards, and then you exile Emergency Powers. It also has addendum, so if you were to have to cast this from your hand during your main phase, you do the card, and then you also get to put a permanent card with CMC 7 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. So it has a little bit of a Rishkar's expertise, one of the expertise effects.
Yeah. On a similar note to that, there's also Echo of Eons, which was in Modern Horizons. And again, similar to you, Max, talking about Time Twister. each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7 cards. But it has the flashback for the exact cost as Time Twister for 3 mana. So it's something that it gives you the option to get that Time Twister effect without having to proxy one. And if it's in your graveyard because you did some surveil or something, you can just cast it for the Time Twister cost as well. I don't know if I necessarily want that, but we were talking about recursion and talking about wanting to be able to put bulk cards in hand. And, you know, I've talked about wheel effects before, sometimes helping out too many of your opponents, but I think if you're playing in a really, really tight meta, I think the chaos you cost is maybe more worthwhile. I think where wheels can sometimes be a problem is when things are a little more casual and you're refilling somebody's hand. I think in a really, really tight meta, people tend to not have empty hands. They tend to have not really had a problem drawing cards usually. And the cards they've drawn are things that they're scheming to do some 3 or 4 step plan with. And I think something like Echo of Eons screws that up as well. So I don't know if I necessarily would run it, but I think it's a card I would consider.
No, that's a great suggestion. And the flashback's always fun too.
Yeah. There's also long-term plans that lets you get any card and put it 3 from the top of your library. So it's relatively cheap. It's like $1. And yes, it's not something you get to cast with Yennett immediately, but there's so much manipulation in this deck. It's pretty easy to then flip it onto the top using one of the 6 different ways this deck has to screw around at the top of the library. So very often it is just going to be one more version of Vamp Tutor almost. And worst case, you have to wait a turn to get the cast off the top. So I think that's one I think this deck might like to use as well. All right. I think we went through everything. Is that right?
I think we did.
What are your thoughts here, Max? First of all, have you played against many Yennett decks? I've seen a couple, I think.
Less than a handful.
But never Stax.
No.
So I actually think this is kind of a fun implementation, as fun as Stax is going to be. I mean, it's still Stax, but I like the implementation of using Yennett for Stax. That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like it. I don't have a problem playing against Stax as long as I know I'm playing against Stax.
Yes, yeah.
Don't be, this is my brand new deck, I don't know how it plays, guy, and then, lock the table out.
Right. Well, in the fact that Marty even asked us what we would think of it, I think that shows that's more thinking about that than I think sometimes you get from players. I think he's seems to be consciously aware that sometimes is an issue for some people. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's an interesting deck. It's also one of the things we kind of mentioned off the air before we started recording was we don't really talk about Stax very often, and it's nice to see something just different. All right. Thank you very much, Marty, for sharing your deck with us. We really appreciate it. It was fun to take a look at. And if you out there as a listener wanted to get us to do decks you play, how would they do that, Max?
Head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Marty, thank you. Thanks to all our listeners. Hope you all had a wonderful holiday season. And we will be back. Do we have one more show this year, Max, or are we done?
This show is airing in the new year.
Oh, we're already there. We're already in 2020. That's the power of time travel. All right. Very cool. Well, thanks very much to everyone. Thank you very much to our editor, Ken Peddle. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max on Twitter at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. We'll be back on Monday with a special guest. Until then, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And that is it.